Hello ladies and gentlemen, this is Rise of the Phoenix. This is going to be part 3 of my commander itemization guide. This part is going to focus on support commanders. The goal of this guide, as with part 2, is to just give you my thought process around why I think certain items are good on these types of commanders. That way, based on which commanders you're using and which faction you're playing, hopefully you can make better decisions on which items to keep / invest in and which items to give to which commanders. Before we get into it, if you enjoy my content, please do consider liking this video and subscribing to my channel. Welcome back everyone. I've pulled up Gandalf the Grey here to give a quick 10 to 15 second overview on what is a support commander in case somebody hasn't seen part 1. If you want more information on how I've classified commanders, please do go check out part 1 of this guide series. So Gandalf the Grey is the perfect example of a support commander because he has a ton of abilities that protect his units. So we have Mithrandir. This is a damage decrease for the entire enemy army. It also gives units avoidance at the beginning of battle. We have Free Peoples, another damage reduction. White Council, damage reduction. High Alert, damage reduction. Wizard comes with a round 1 stun. Blindside, another stun. Fleeting movements, some avoidance there. Sprinkle in a little bit of healing on top of that. And you have a recipe for a very powerful support commander. Gandalf the Grey is quite good at keeping his units alive, so when you're itemizing for him, I think it's important to understand that the items need to help those units deal more damage because Gandalf's skill set is going to be helping keep those units alive. So while damage dealing commanders, somewhat ironically, actually want some defensive bonuses sprinkled in as far as their itemization goes, because their damage is going to be based on how much of their army is left alive, and they're not good on their own at keeping their army alive. Support commanders actually want items that help their units deal damage because they're not dealing damage on their own. They need their units to deal damage. So let's take a quick glance at my Gandalf's setup here. I have a Carver with Men's Strength. Another very popular option is the Carver with Smite to get some extra procs of the Grey. I don't usually heavily invest into the Grey because I don't think it scales very well. So I actually went with Men's Strength to help my sharpshooters deal a little bit of extra damage. The important thing when you're picking a weapon for a support-oriented commander, in my opinion, is you want to find something that's going to boost the attack of the types of units that you're going to be using. For example, if we shift over to Haldir, look at his bow, he's going to be using a lot of ranged units. That's his primary damage source. So he's actually going to want a Mirkwood bow or some other weapon that gives ranged army attack. I mean, on Gandalf, you could honestly run a Mirkwood bow with ranged might as well, if you're building him the way I'm building him. I wonder if this is actually better now that I think about it. I'd lose like a little bit of focus, but I'd gain, well, I'm using sharps and sense. The sharps are still getting the bonus from the Carver. Probably not worth switching out. Anyway, little thinking out loud there for a moment. But, I mean, you could give a Mirkwood bow to Gandalf if you're running double ranged unit. I actually think a Cutlass would be a perfectly fine choice as well for Gandalf. If you're going to run full melee units, let's say you're, for example, like Rohan, and you could run like Marshals, Cavaliers, and Ram Riders, something of that sort. Run full melee units and give him melee attack. As far as oranges go, I don't really want to focus on oranges in these videos. The Noldor Sword, I think, is very solid on Gandalf. It gives attack to men and elves. It's just a bit harder to refine than a purple, so that's why I don't want to focus on those orange items. Speaking of not focusing on orange items, I have a Plate of the Citadel for Gandalf because I've been running like Swans or Katas as my front line. This is just going to help my front line stay alive because I think I have plenty of damage in my other items to keep my plenty of damage in my other items. Wow, I really lost my train of thought there. I have plenty of damage in my other items for my ranged units, which are going to be my primary sources of dealing damage, that I feel like this helps my front line be stable, or more stable than it would be. That way those ranged units can just sit back and deal damage. In general, as far as items go, chest pieces tend to be much more focused on defensive stats, at least so far the items we have. Actually, let's pull up the items. I don't know if there's any chest that has offensive stats now that I'm like fully sitting here thinking about it. That can have Shroud, this can have melee vigor, this can have like more focus, also melee vigor, ranged vigor. Yeah, I don't think there's any chest piece that actually has offensive stats on it. So I guess even with these commanders for your chest pieces, you're going to have to be focusing more on defense. Depending on your commander, you could actually pick up a quilted armor and boost up your focus a bit more. Might help crank out a little bit more healing and prevent a little bit more damage. And then as far as helms go, I think there are actually a lot of viable options for this slot. If you're going to be running ranged units, I think the Trapper's Hood is about as good as you're going to get because it gives army attack ranged. It can also come with Hysteria to add a little bit more crowd control on top of the crowd control that your commander might already come with. In the case of Gandalf, he has a bunch of stuns. This can help just throw out a little bit more crowd control, and Madness actually has the potential of being an offensive form of crowd control, so that's quite solid. I think the Bone Mask is another good option. It comes with Might and Focus, which are the best stats for most of these types of commanders, and it adds army HP as well, which is very, very solid. The Arnor Cask is not a terrible option. Coming with Might and Focus, it misses the health of the Bone Mask. So I think on commanders that can equip the Bone Mask is actually going to be better. But for somebody like Arwen, who cannot equip the Bone Mask because of the race restrictions, the Arnor Cask is a fine option. One thing that, in my opinion, you really want to be looking for, particularly as Gandalf, really any commander with Convener, even though I'm not doing this on my Gandalf, I'm telling you guys to do it. Your Helm slot can be a really solid source of anti-crowd control. So crowd control effects are very strong against these types of commanders who are relying on their army to do damage, because if their army is stunned or gone mad, those units are either killing themselves or they're just not dealing damage, and that becomes a big problem. Somebody like Legolas, if his guardians are stunned, it doesn't matter. You're going to miss out on like a couple thousand damage. Meanwhile, he's off, popping off 250k on his own. Who cares if your army is stunned? With support commanders, you really don't want your army to sit in crowd control, particularly in the early rounds, as those tend to be the most vital rounds of combat. And because of that, I think the Horseman's Helm is actually quite a solid choice on a lot of support commanders, particularly if you're running with cavalry armies, or like 2 out of 3 of your units are cavalry. I think this is actually a very respectable choice as well in the Helm slot. For the accessory slot, it's going to depend a lot on what units you're running. In the case of Gandalf, I think if you're going to run double range, you really want a Wizard's Fireworks. Optimally, I think you want the Mend on this one. Unfortunately, I made the mistake a while ago of getting rid of my Mend because I was like, oh, I'm just going to go for the whole cavalry thing, and then, like, every single freaking evil player on the server has like a rank 25 Khaldun, and so the whole build mounted units thing wasn't particularly working great. So I kind of shifted focus. That, combined with the half-elven change, made me want to shift more towards ranged units. So yeah, Mend I think would be better. There are situations actually where Hunter's Mark could be a very reasonable choice, or even Bane of Mounted units with how many mounted units there are out there. If you're primarily fighting against good factions, Or if you're on a non-roleplay server where you're fighting like Theoden, Retaliate Theoden with Fallen, you might actually want Bane of Mounted units there. But yeah, in general, Wizard's Fireworks is good, and anybody who wants to run double ranged units. Hithlane is fine as it adds some army HP. Smoking Pipe with heal is always a good choice. You know, a lot of these commanders are focus based. A lot of these support commanders, they're focus based, and so throwing in a little bit of extra healing is also quite fine as well. The accessory slot I think is probably the most flexible slot for these guys. If you're evil and you're running something like Gothmog or Gorbag or Grima, I think Drums of Moria is definitely the best accessory that you can pick up, because Evil Side has very powerful melee units. You can also have the Bane of Dwarves trait on this to help you get through Guardians, Ram Riders, Iron Warriors, and very tanky, problematic units such as those. So if you can pick up an army attack boost on the accessory slot, I think that's going to be the absolute best. Otherwise, try to pick up like a little bit of focus, a little bit of healing, or some army HP in this slot as well. And we'll go through the item list before the time runs out to make sure I haven't forgotten to mention anything. Hobbit Fiddle, I think, is like the worst accessory possible, like absolutely terrible. I'm not a huge fan of the Harp of Lorien either, like +5 speed to elves. Like, why would I pick +5 speed to elves when I could add +1 HP via Hithlane? I don't know. Maybe there's some edge case where it's actually like maybe like Gilgalad or something could make it work. But yeah, in general, I think that is it for the accessory slot and all the other slots as well. We'll do the quick rundown here. So for the support commanders, pull up the items again. In the weapon slot, you really want to try to get a plus attack bonus to whatever units you're running. In the armor slot, you want to pick up some more focus or a defensive buff, as these armors don't have offensive buffs, at least not so far in the game. Maybe they'll add those eventually in the future. In the helm slot, I think if you're using ranged units, you want more attack or anti-crowd control. If you're using melee units, I think you're really going to want to pick up some form of anti-crowd control. I guess the Bone Mask might be fine for the HP as well, but I really think you want to use that helm slot to kind of shore up the potential weakness to crowd control that your army may have. Then in the accessory slot, if you can pick up another attack bonus, that is wonderful. Otherwise, try to pick up a little bit more healing / focus or a damage boost against a particular type of unit that you're fighting a lot of, whether that's dwarves, whether that's mounted units, whether that's orcs, whatever it may be. You can look to kind of round out your itemization with the accessory slot in that way. All right, that's it for this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it and learned something useful. Let me know what you think about my opinions on itemization for support commanders down in the comment sections below. I'll catch you in the next one. Rise of the Phoenix, over and out.